Bienvenidos al Tribunal Supremo de
Welcome to the
Elecciones,
Supreme Elections
Casa de la
Tribunal, home
Democracia
of the Costa Rican
costarricense.
democracy.
Para la comodidad de todas las
For the
personas
convenience of all the
presentes, por
attendees,
favor apague o
please
ponga en modo de silencio
turn off your
su
cell phone or put
teléfono
it on
celular.
silent mode.
En caso de activarse
In
la
case
sirena
of
de
an activation
evacuación,
of the evacuation
mantenga la
siren,
calma
keep
y diríjase
yourself
a las
calm
salidas
and go
de
to the
emergencia
emergency
en la
exits
parte frontal
in the
o
front part
posterior
or the back
del
part
lado derecho del
on the
auditorio
right-hand side
y
of the
siga las
auditorium
instrucciones
and
de
follow the
nuestro
instructions of
personal
our staff.
brigadistas. Los servicios sanitarios se
The
ubican en el
restrooms
cuarto
are
piso.
located in the fourth
Si requiere
floor.
información
If you
adicional,
need any
por
additional
favor,
information, please
refiérase a nuestro personal presente
look to the
en
staff
esta actividad.
that is present in this
Se les
activity.
recuerda que en este
You're reminded that in this
auditorio es
auditorium,
prohibido fumar y
smoking
consumir
and
alimentos.
eating food is
Gracias por su
forbidden.
valiosa cooperación.
Thank you for your
Le
valuable
deseamos
cooperation, and we
una
wish you
feliz estancia.
a good stay.
Listo. Buenas tardes a todas las personas.
Good afternoon to all of us accompanying us today in this auditorium in the morning, and those who are live following us. Thank you for being with us in this event of youth activism and civic space, a topic we consider is very important for this summit for the democracy that is developing this week. I pass the floor to the person, Special Envoy Avikenauer of the Department of State for Global Issues of Youth, who will give us some opening words for the event. Mr. Avid.
Hello, everyone. Oh my goodness, it is so good to be with you all today, and truly it is an honor to get to join you here. And I also want to thank International Idea and Redlad, as well as the broader Global Democracy Coalition for organizing this event today. I am just so thrilled to get to join you and so look forward to hearing your stories, your experiences, and your ideas. I am former Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer and the first special envoy for global youth issues at the U.S. Department of State. I joined the U.S. Department of State in November 2022, appointed by President Biden to lead U.S. government efforts to engage young people internationally to solve not just the pressing challenges of today, but also build just greater global connectivity and networks to shape the world of tomorrow. In this role, I serve as the principal representative on youth issues for the U.S. Department of State and lead efforts to coordinate and amplify global youth policies and initiatives. And again, I couldn't be more excited to be here with you today at the Summit for Democracy and having an opportunity to speak with you about my journey through public service and the importance of young people's participation in democracy and policymaking. At a time when democracy is under threat around the world, and with more than half the world's population under the age of 30, young people can facilitate democratic renewal and hope. We must engage them, empower them, and work hand in hand to promote democracy and human rights. As one of the youngest people ever elected to the US Congress, actually at the age of 29, I firmly believe you are never too young to lead and make real change. And I truly believe that although young people face very real barriers, both institutional and also personal, that being young and engaging in democracy, that is your superpower. Your journey, your story, and your individual superpowers are unique to you, different than mine and different from the person sitting next to you here today. But through our stories, when we share them, that is where we find our hope. And my story begins by growing up in a very small town in a place called Iowa. It's the middle of the country in the United States, in a town called Sherrill that literally has more cows than people. Growing up in my community, I didn't know really anybody in political office. My parents were working class. My dad was a pipe fitter welder. My mom was a secretary. And I am a first-generation college graduate. And although I wasn't exposed to politics per se growing up, I did start to pay attention at a very young age because of the amazing educators I had. You see, I was 10 years old and remember going to school and getting something called the Weekly Reader, where it was basically a newsletter talking about what was happening in the world. And with that information, I very quickly learned that what was going on in my very small town and in my state impacted what was happening across the globe, and what was happening across the globe also impacted us back in our small town. And I knew at that age it was so important to pay attention. I also was really fortunate because I was very close with my mom's family and my dad's, and my mom was one of 8, so she had a lot of brothers and sisters. And on weekends, we'd all hang out together. And we'd have dinner on Saturday nights, and after dinner, I would sit at that table with my grandfather, who was a firefighter and a Democrat, an uncle who was a small business owner and a Democrat, and also an uncle who was a lawyer and a Republican. And so there were multiple different viewpoints sitting around that table. And there I was as a 10-year-old listening, but also sharing my opinions. Because I was reading that Weekly Reader, sometimes I knew more about what was going on in the world than they did. And what I was taught, and what my grandfather specifically told me, that because I was a young girl, I deserved every right to a seat at the table as the grown men. And that lesson stood with me for the rest of my life. You see, when I was 16 years old, I had an opportunity where it came where it was something called being a U.S. congressional page. So this was something where as a 16-year-old, I could live and work in Washington, D.C., on the floor of the U.S. House, and actually meet some of these Congress people that I had read about, that I had saw on TV, that I had put on a pedestal, thinking that they knew everything about everything. And that experience also shaped my life. Because what that did was the first time ever I got on a plane, I went to Washington, I met young people who also cared, who believed that, again, what was happening in their communities impacted others, who were paying attention, and who were so different, again, than the way that I grew up. Yet again, we found so many commonalities, and in those experiences, it was the first time I really didn't feel alone growing up, and that network of young people was just so, so important. The other lesson I learned was having those conversations with congressmen and congresswomen in 2006. And honestly, it was 2006 in the United States. There was a lot of congressmen. There are more congresswomen now, but we can always have more. And as I was having these conversations, I realized that person did not know everything, wasn't an expert in absolutely everything. And what that did was teach me that you didn't have to be perfect before you ran for office, before you did the thing that you cared about, that you could continue to learn and grow and build, again, a network around you. And that experience, again, shaped my life and what I did next. See, I went back to Iowa, and I had an opportunity to be then a page for the Iowa House of Representatives. So I was an 18-year-old, then getting to work around state lawmakers. And there was a moment where they did this thing where they locked everybody in the chamber so no one could run out on the vote. They had to take the vote. And it was a vote to add sexual orientation to the Iowa Civil Rights Act. It would eventually legalize same-sex marriage in Iowa and become Iowa one of the first states in the country to do so. And there I was, this 18-year-old, watching this happen, looking out at lawmakers who've been working on it, honestly, since the 80s. And they all had tears in their eyes, and so did I. And it was in that moment, as an 18-year-old, where I realized that, oh, this government thing, this policy thing, this is where you can make an impact. You can have a huge impact on your community, on the people you love. You can fight for justice, and you can win. And that, again, is something that never left me. When I was 24 years old, I had an opportunity to run for the Iowa State House. Now, this was a seat that hadn't been open since the year I was born. So for 25 years, it had been held by the same person. He was leaving it, it was an open seat, and there were a bunch of men in their 50s running for it already. And I know there were so many people who thought, what is this 24-year-old doing running for office, right? What could she know? Why is she even doing it? Well, I was doing it because I started to see young people leave. They were leaving my community, they were leaving my state, they weren't finding the opportunities there, and they weren't having their voices heard at the table. And so instead of complaining about it, I thought, well, maybe I should do something about it. And there I was at the age of 24 deciding to run for the Iowa House. And off I went, knocking on doors, talking to people face to face. And I will tell you this, as I said earlier about your superpower, yes, being young, it is tough when you decide to take that step, to be a public advocate, whether it's in public service or whether it's in nonprofit, whatever it is. When you put yourself out there, there are barriers and it is hard. But again, at the same time, you are underestimated. And it is your superpower because you can get out there, you can do the thing the right way and for the reasons that matter to you and to your community, and you don't have to shy away from that. And so again, as I was out there knocking on doors, and I know some of my opponents had issues with people opening the doors to have conversations, they were opening them for me, and I think truly they thought I was trying to sell them cookies. And so they wanted to have conversations with me, and then we talked about their grandkids leaving. And we talked about how they want their kids to move back home so they can see their grandkids, and again, they're not finding the opportunities. We talked about issues that mattered. And I was lucky enough to have won that race and then had an opportunity to serve in the Iowa House for 4 years, where I fought tooth and nail against attacks on workers' rights, on attacks on our education system, and also fought for women's rights, for equality, for things that mattered to, again, myself and my community. At the age of 28, I decided, after looking around, realizing that there was more work to do on the federal level, I decided to run for the US House of Representatives. Now, if you think people thought, what is this 24-year-old doing running for State House? They sure thought that when a 28-year-old decided to run for the US House of Representatives in the United States, because of the fact that there had never in the history of the United States ever been a woman elected to her 20s to the US Congress. And also, Iowa was only 2 states in the country left where we had never elected a congresswoman before. So there were so many reasons, right, of why folks thought it couldn't be done. Of all of the reasons, as a young woman, I probably, could have said, I'll just stay where I'm at and not take that chance. But there were too many important things to fight for. And so I decided to run. I didn't know how it was going to work. In fact, I probably thought, big chance I'm not going to make it. But I knew, again, it was important to get out there, to have those conversations, to do the things that were hard but also important. And I was, again, lucky enough to win that race and become one of the first congresswomen in Iowa and one of the youngest women ever elected to the US House of Representatives. And during that time, I will tell you, I learned even more just how important it was to use my voice. Because as I stated earlier, your story, yours is different than mine. It is different than the person sitting next to you. And when you share that when you get vulnerable about the things that matter to you, you may be just surprised at all of the change you can make and the people you can bring with you. It is something I decided to do when I decided to share my battle with endometriosis. It's a condition that affects 1 in 9 women across in the entire world. And it was something that honestly wasn't getting enough attention. I was frustrated about it. I thought, well, somebody should change that. And I thought, well, I guess I'm a congresswoman, so maybe I should. And I decided to stand on the floor of the US House, talk about my ovaries, right, women's health, in a way that I don't know ever had been done before on the floor of the House. And after I did that, although it was scary, right, although it was hard, and I knew my district probably would have preferred me talking more about roads and bridges than my reproductive health, but it was also an important story to share. And when I did, it was amazing to see all of the other people who were impacted, right? The congressmen who had wives who had it, or sisters. The other women who also had it, who had never shared it before. It was extraordinary, and in that time, we actually then doubled the funding for research and started a caucus around that condition. And it was partly because, right, of being vulnerable, of sharing the thing that was unique to me. And that, again, is what I'm here to ask you to do today, to continue to use your voices, to step up for your communities in ways I know you're already doing, but excited to see what you continue to do in the future. Although I know it can be hard, and I know that so many of us will experience that voice inside our heads that might tell us that our opinion doesn't matter, or that our actions won't make a difference. And again, I am here to encourage each and every single one of you to push that voice aside and believe in your mission and in your journey. Remember that you are in that position, or in that place, or in this room to do the work that needs to be done, and to do it well, and most importantly, with integrity. As we close, I have one final story about public service I'd like to share. You see, as I was growing up, I told you I didn't really know anybody that was a politician, but I did know good public servants. And that was my grandfather, who was the firefighter. And to me, he was one of the best examples about what public service, what democracy should be about. Because when he would get a phone call to run into a burning building, he didn't call back and ask before he ran in, what color's your skin? How much money do you make? Where are you from? What language do you speak? Who do you love? How old are you? He didn't ask those questions. He just showed up and he helped people and he did his job. And that, my friends, is how I've tried to live, but I know you are in this room today because that is who you are, and it is why you are here. I also know that in so many cases, advocates from marginalized communities can face additional challenges in their advocacy work. Collectively, we can all do more to ensure that the ability of every individual to address grievances and advocate for policy changes is respected and, most importantly, safe. It is a global challenge we must take on and do all we can to get there. We all deserve to feel safe and have a voice and a seat at the table. Public advocacy is a serious decision, and I am grateful that you are in this room and you've decided to be change makers. At the end of the day, no matter where you're from, community service is clearly something that we all value deeply, and we are dedicated to solving problems and improving the lives of the people in our communities. The United States government supports advocacy in several ways, by recognizing courageous activists and by developing future leaders like yourselves. At the U.S. Department of State, we have prioritized embedding diversity and inclusion into our work and helping to address racial and other inequities globally. This effort generates better policies that seek to decrease barriers to marginalized communities worldwide, and it reinforces the U.S. global commitment to respect human rights and democratic principles. As President Biden said, no fundamental social change occurs merely because governments act. It's because civil society, the conscience of a country, begins to rise up and demand change. I hope that your experience at the summit this week, today as well, will provide you with the tools and the inspiration to drive sustainable development, advocate for policy change, exchange ideas with each other, and build a network of colleagues and allies who can support you in your professional development and make a positive impact on your communities. Thank you for your dedication, your hard work, and thank you for taking the time to be with us all today. Look forward to meeting you all and seeing you soon. Bye.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Abby, por esas
Thank you,
palabras
Abby,
tan
for those
inspiradoras para
inspiring
todas las
words
personas jóvenes
to
que nos
all the
encontramos
young
acá.
people that are here.
Definitivamente
Definitely,
nos motiva a seguir
you're
luchando
motivating
por
us to
justicia
continue
y
fighting for what we
defendiendo
believe
la
is fair
democracia.
and continue
Ahora
defending
vamos a
democracy.
dar
Now we're going to
inicio al
begin
evento. La
this
modalidad
event.
va a tener dos
The
paneles,
basement modality will have
uno
two
con
panels,
países
one
de América
with the
Latina,
countries of
donde
Latin America,
hablaremos
where we'll
sobre
opens
el
with
espacio
some
cívico
questions
en
of
cada
the civic
país,
space in each
y
country.
posteriormente
And
pasará a
afterwards
personas de otras
will be
regiones
people
o
from other
según
regions
países
to make
relacionados
comments
con
and
lo
reactions
que
to what
comentamos.
we commented.
Entonces,
So
llamaré a nuestra
I'm going to
moderadora,
call our
Pamela
moderator,
Salazar
Pamela
Ramírez,
Salazar
licenciada
Ramirez,
en Relaciones
as you said, in
Internacionales, con
international
énfasis en
relations with
democracia.
emphasis in democracy.
Actualmente
Currently,
oficial encargada
she's
de
the
proyectos
officer in
del
charge of
Centro de
projects of the
Pensamiento de
Center
la
of
Fundación
Thought
para la
of the
Paz y la
Foundation for
Democracia,
Peace and
FUNPADEM.
Democracy, FUNPADEM.
Gracias, Pamela, por acompañarnos.
Thank you, Pamela, for being with us.
Llamaremos ahora a
And we'll
nuestros
call
ponentes que ya
our
tendrán la oportunidad de presentarse
presenters
ellos
that
mismos.
they will
Y
introduce
después
themselves.
pasar las personas de
So the
Perú,
people from Peru, El Salvador,
Venezuela y Nicaragua.
Venezuela, and
Entonces, por
Nicaragua,
favor.
please come to the stage. And thank you.
Un comentario adicional.
An additional comment.
Estaremos pasando una lista
We are
de
going to
asistencia
pass
en
an
inglés y en
attendance
español
list
para
in
que,
English
por
and
favor, lo
Spanish, so
vayan
please
llenando.
fill it up.
Y también pasaremos
And
unas
also
hojas
we'll
para
pass
que
some
anoten las
sheets of
preguntas
paper
y las
to write down
leeremos
your
al final del
questions, and we'll read them
para
at the end of the event
responderlas.
in order to answer them. Thank you.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos y a
Good
todas.
afternoon to all of you.
Muchas gracias por
Thank you very much for being with us, not only those who are here, but also who are following us through or from the virtual platforms. For us, and for us here at the table, it's a pleasure seeing so many people here gathered together sharing this interest of continue struggling, as Mrs. Abby mentioned. Thank you for those words. It encourages us to continue fighting for their rights that all the young people deserve to see fulfilled in all the areas and the spheres of our life. I feel very honored of being with you, young men and young ladies. It's a pleasure to see how they're young people, not only here in Costa Rica, but in where we are today, but in all of the countries of Latin America, where there are people that are fighting or struggling to make evident the compliance of these rights. And the idea is that we can speak today a little bit about the experiences you have had in your countries. I want to remind you also, those who are here, that the idea is that we get some recommendations, concrete recommendations about the participation of young people in democracy that will be presented, that will be delivered to the participating government the day of tomorrow in the main activity. So we invite you to start thinking in some of those recommendations you want to present also to the people that are in social networks. If you want there in the comments to make some recommendations, they will always be welcome. So I'm going to open the floor to these four great people accompanying me so they may introduce themselves, and we begin this conversation. Okay, please go ahead. Good afternoon. I'm Juno Acosta. I'm from Nicaragua. I am Executive Director and Deputy President of the Latin American Network of Youth for Democracy, also representative of the youth sector in Nicaragua, the Civic Alliance for Justice and Democracy.
Saludos a todos y muchísimas gracias por la
Hello to
invitación.
everyone,
De
and thank you
verdad,
for the
una
invitation.
joven de Venezuela
I'm a
aquí
youth of
honrada
Venezuela,
por
honored for being here in this space.
Bueno, yo soy María José Brito,
I'm Maria Jose
represento una
Brito. I
organización que
represent
se
an
llama
organization called
Consorcio
Consorcio Desarrollo y
y lidero
Justicia,
un proyecto
and I
en
lead
el
a
país
project
que se
in the
llama
country
Foro
called
Permanente de
Permanent Forum
Juventudes.
of
El Foro
Youths.
Permanente de
The
Juventudes
Permanent
es
Youth
un
of
espacio
Forums is
innovación
an
política que le
innovation, a
permite a
space of
jóvenes de
political
diversas
innovation that
posiciones de
enables
liderazgo
youth of
poder
different
participar
levels
rumbo
of
a la
leadership to
transición
participate
política de
in
democracia en
towards
Venezuela
the
que todos
political
queremos.
transition in Venezuela that we all want. Thank you. I'm Julio Rosita.
Muy buenas tardes con
Good
todas y
afternoon
todos. Mi
to all of
nombre
you.
es Julia Rosita
I'm Julia
Chávez,
Rosita
soy del
Llaves.
país de Perú.
I'm from the
Bueno,
country
soy
of Peru.
Secretaria Nacional de
I'm National
Juventudes
Secretary of
de la
Youth,
Federación Nacional de
National
Mujeres
Federation of
Campesinas Artesanas Indígenas Nativas
Peasant and
Originarias del Perú.
artisan and native women from Peru. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. My name is Alejandro Mansur. I'm from El Salvador. It's a pleasure being here, and I am part of representation of the youth organization Proyecto Poder or Power Project. Thank you.
Gracias. Bueno,
Thank you.
para dar inicio,
Okay, to
yo sé
begin,
que cada uno de
I
ustedes
know
tiene
that each
mucho
one of
que
you has
contar,
a lot to
¿verdad?
tell
Incluso
to
yo sé
us,
que Rosita tiene
and I
una
know that
presentación
Rosita has
para
a presentation
exponernos.
to
Sí,
present to us, right?
¿o no?
No.
Sí, ok,
Yes.
perfecto. Entonces,
Great.
vamos a plantear
So we're
una
gonna
pregunta general,
make a
¿verdad?
general
Es para los
question
cuatro, la idea es que se puedan
for the four of you.
expresar
The
estos
idea is that
espacios
you
para
express
ustedes,
the
para que
spaces for
podamos
you,
conocer
so we
no
may
solo la
know
realidad de
not
quienes
only the
vivimos
reality
acá
of
en
those
Costa
of
Rica,
us
sino que
living here in
podamos
Costa
también
Rica, but
conocer
that we know
experiencias
the
de
experiences
ustedes
of you
y cómo han
and how
vivido todo este tema,
you have
cómo han
lived all
buscado
this
el
subject
cumplimiento de
matter,
los
how you
derechos
look for
humanos
the
en medio
compliance
de las
or meeting the
diferentes
human
realidades
rights
y
in
situaciones
the
que
midst of
suceden en sus
different realities or
países.
situations
Entonces,
that
les lanzo la
happen in your
pregunta y
country. So
es,
the question is,
¿cómo ha afectado o cómo
how
afectan al día de hoy las
currently
restricciones al
the
espacio
restrictions
cívico
to
de
the
las
civic space
personas
affect
jóvenes
the
y las
youth people
organizaciones juveniles
and
en sus
youth
respectivos
organizations in your
países?
respective
Pueden
countries?
conversar el
You
que
can
guste,
talk
podemos
whoever
empezar.
wants.
Rosita, cuando quieras hacer
Rosita,
la
wherever you
presentación.
want, whenever you want to make the presentation, please feel so.
¿Quién desea empezar?
Who wants to begin?
¿Empezar? Adelante.
Bien. Bueno, respecto a la pregunta,
Now concerning the question,
como bien se sabe,
as it is
Perú
well
está
known,
sufriendo ahorita
Peru is right
una
now suffering
dictadura
a dictatorship, a
cívico-militar
civic
con el
military
actual gobierno de
dictatorship with the
Dina
government of Dina Boluarte.
Nosotros,
We,
como jóvenes,
as
hemos
youth,
sido
have
los
been
más golpeados.
the ones that have been
Y,
hit
bueno,
hardest,
quiero dar la voz
and I want to give the
de los
voice
pueblos indígenas.
of the indigenous
Hemos
people.
tomado la batuta,
We have
los jóvenes.
assumed the leadership, the youth.
Disculpen las lágrimas,
I
pero
apologize
es un
my
espacio
tears,
en el cual
but this is a
nosotros
space
y nosotros
where
estamos
we
aprovechando
are taking
para
advantage
denunciar
to make
lo que está
an
sucediendo
accusation
en
of what is
nuestros
happening in our
países con
countries
nuestros hermanos y
with our
hermanas
brethren
indígenas.
and sisters, indigenous
Actualmente
brethren
hay
and sisters.
más de
Currently, there are
67
over
muertos,
67
que entre ellos el
deaths.
60%
Among them,
son
60%
jóvenes de
are youth
14,
of
15,
14,
18,
15,
20,
18,
22
20,
años
22 years
estamos
of age
que están muriendo y nos
that are
están
dying
asesinando de la
and
peor
being
manera.
assassinated in the worst way, and unfortunately in the country of Peru. To raise your voice, to claim a right that corresponds to us, is a crime. Today we're suffering a political persecution, repressions with youth directors want to make us stay quiet or put us in prison, but we want to fight hand by hand so the next generations will not suffer this. Today, democracy is something they have taken away from us. I would like to be able to. I would like you please to view this PDF presentation before this dictatorship of our president.
Aún podíamos
with the
salir a las
coup
calles a
d'etat,
hacer una marcha pacífica
we went to the
a
streets to
reclamar
make
los
a
derechos
pacific
que nos
demonstration
correspondían, los
to
derechos
claim
que
for the
aún
rights that
mantenían a los
correspond to us
pueblos indígenas.
that still
A
were
partir
affecting
del
the
7
indigenous
de
people
diciembre
as
de
of December 7,
2022, cuando se
2022,
dio el golpe de estado
when
en mi
the
país,
coup d'etat
las cosas
happened in our country,
cambiaron. Dina
in my
Boluarte
country,
asumió el
things
cargo
changed.
y inmediatamente
Dina Boluarte
se
assumed
tomó la
immediately,
dictadura
and
cívico-militar.
this civic
Hoy no
military
tenemos
dictatorship took over.
el
Today we do
acceso
not
a
have
la
access
libertad de expresión,
to
a la
liberty of
libertad de una
freedom of
reunión
expression,
pacífica,
freedom of a
pese a que
pacific
nuestra
meeting,
Constitución
in spite
nos
of the fact that our
ampara el
Constitution
artículo
covers us,
45 y
Article
44,
45 and
donde
44,
deberíamos de
where we
reunirnos
should
para ver
get
temas
together to
políticos, temas
see
privados, pero sin
political
embargo eso no
issues
se ha
or private issues, but that
respetado
has not been
suficiente.
respected
A
up to
causa de
today.
ello, desde el
Because
7
of
de
that,
diciembre
since
de
December 7th
2022,
of 2022,
los asesinatos
there have been
de nuestros
assassinations
hermanos indígenas
to our indigenous people have been brutal. The affected departments were Ayacucho, Anuchi, and Julianca. They killed two brethren in Curima in one single day, 17 brethren in Julianca. They're all young people. We know the darkness and the lack of power we're feeling. And we've been 2 months now in struggle in our capital, and currently the high class and the middle class and low class, as it's well known, the indigenous people are originals. We will always be the lower class, and it's precisely we are the ones that have to give our lives to fight and to be able to survive towards the society. And not only that, I don't want to spend all this time explaining. I want to pass the floor to my colleagues, and I'll continue expressing what I really came to do here. Thank you very much.
Adelante, quien guste.
Bueno, básicamente las restricciones que los jóvenes en Venezuela
Restrictions about the youth in Venezuela for participating within a concept of authoritarianism. We have to stress the type of regime we have in Venezuela.
autoritarismo restrictivo hegemónico que
Restrictions
permite o cierta participación
that allow for certain participation, but even then limit, persecute you.
restricciones civiles
We have civil restrictions from the states,
cuando un joven en Venezuela, por ejemplo,
from the state. When a young person in Venezuela,
¿cómo participa un joven en Venezuela?
how
Un joven en Venezuela primero se organiza,
participate, organize,
realizar
they want to participate in the democracy. They want to organize their peers in the in college, in their political party, whatever they are, in order to be organized. The younger can do it,
no vaya a un
but
de los de registro principal en Venezuela,
if
presente un documento
he has to
notificatorio
present
ante los
a
organismos del
document
Estado que diga,
before the state stating that I want to conform a organization in order to become legal with the participation that it is my right, human right, expressing the freedom of association. When a young present a document and the document states the word human rights, democracy, or peace, that document, the register, denies the authorization. So when they want to organize and they want to get some financing for their activities, he cannot do it. These restrictions limit the free exercise of a young leader in Venezuela. So clearly the social texture is limited because they don't have the possibility. We evaluate this situation, and it's very difficult for a youngster in Venezuela to increase his participation profile. So what do? From the forum, we organize and we collectively add our efforts in order to overcome these barriers, establishing partnership with persons who have a background who can provide certain support. In my case, for example, I wanted to register an organization to speak about peace construction. I couldn't do it. I haven't been able to do it. So I anchor my projects with already existing organizations who have been around for 20 or 30 years. Since 2017, the government banned registration of this type of organizations. So we see organizations that are hybrid because we can say there is a document, but they don't have the legal documents from the state. So we have this type of limitations, so we don't have the right for association. Nicaragua or El Salvador? Thank you. Yes. When I saw the general theme of this event, I did the exercise of trying to understand or about civic space. It's this space where we have a number of players or stakeholders in the civil society according to their ideals in order to express themselves, to position before certain topics, certain issues. And since there's so many stakeholders, we have a lot of differences. The youth organizations, gender organizations, environmental organizations. So I did the exercise to try to understand the civil space and trying to understand it. And I saw it was made up of three areas: freedom of association. Civic spaces must promote that the persons can associate in the case of the youth, and this generate organizations that are important, and they become empowered. Is the capability of individuals to express themselves, to make the problems known. In the case of El Salvador, another thing I visualized was freedom of expression. Without freedom of expression, it doesn't make sense to have a civic space. It's a fundamental issue for organizations, in this case, the young in this civic space could express themselves to have an open dialogue. Taking these elements into consideration, I thought, what are the restrictions in my country, El Salvador? And the situations, we have a very specific situation that we have in El Salvador is in the context of the exception regime in our country, which to explain this regime of exception is an exceptional condition where certain rights are restricted in certain constitutional rights. They follow certain purposes because according to our constitution, the goal of this is to facilitate the actions of the state with specific actions in the case of war, natural disaster, etc. So, restrictions of constitutional rights in the country 2 days ago was the anniversary, 1 year of this exception. The goal has to do with safety, with organized crime. What's the base? Why I speak about this regime of exemption? Because we find in the street a lot of soldiers. Freedom for association is not allowed. Somebody can be arrested without having a judicial order. If we talked about abuse of power, you can be detained arbitrarily. What this regime affect the civic space is fear. So if you cannot associate as youth, go out in the streets because you never know when you will be detained. So the base of operations is in fear. What fear generates is contrary to association. The association allows for empowerment, for acting. Being in a condition of fear is delicate. That's what we have in El Salvador. That's what I will add. Nicaragua. Well, I don't know where to begin. Nicaragua, different from my friends here in the panel. We have a dictatorship like Venezuela or Cuba, but for us, the civic space was more complex than all of them. Mainly, many of the youngers were arrested, were killed in 2018, the 9th of February. Several of them were liberated, 35 leaders that were in the prisons of Nicaragua, but it has been a challenge for our youth. Before 2018, we didn't have this type of spaces of interest to defend democracy or the human rights in my country, but we were the first one to go out to the streets demanding justice, freedom, democracy. We were the first to be in these spaces of political decisions, dialogues, negotiations. And here we have among us persons that were in prison, young leaders like Arixa Maitiela, from our different positions in exile, always available and present in these summits in countries that promote democracy. Let's not forget that we still have 38 political prisoners. Ricardo Alvarez is the main one, where the church is being persecuted. It doesn't matter if they're young, adult. We see a lot of youngsters just because their pastoral leaders are being persecuted and imprisoned. So for us it's important to state that this type of spaces like the Summit of Democracy, to share experiences with each one of the young persons that are here representing the countries, that be on guard, be watchful of the democracies in Latin America, to be those agents that are watchful of democracies, because we have mirrors and there are countries that are following their path, like civic prohibitions. We mobilize like students and like youngsters, but change only can come from new generations. The population in Nicaragua and Latin America to believe in new generations that our ideas would be part of those public policies that we want to create at Latin American level. And today is our commitment. We are here young persons representing before this second summit of democracy, that we're important agents, and we have the power to decide politically and to be mature. Even if we have 1,000 challenges, we will innovate, we will defend democracy, we will defend human rights, because they don't have color or political flag. Thank you.
Sí, ok, gracias. Bueno, agradecerles,
To
de verdad, yo creo
thank
que
you,
sin duda alguna
without
este
any
espacio
doubt,
de apertura nos
this
deja ver que
space
efectivamente, y me
allow us
gustó
to
mucho
see,
lo que decías ahora, Jonah,
Jonah, what you mentioned, human rights do not have
no
color,
tienen bandera,
do not have
no
a
tienen país,
flag, do not have a
no es
country.
un tema de a dónde
It's
yo
not
estoy,
just of where
sino
I
que yo
am,
como persona en cualquier parte del mundo tenga acceso a ellos,
myself,
¿verdad?
any
Independientemente
part
si soy
of
un
the
adulto
world,
mayor, si soy una persona
I
joven,
have the
soy
right,
una
even
persona indígena, soy
younger,
hombre, si soy mujer,
indigenous, male, female,
independientemente de mi orientación sexual, lo que sea,
my
yo tengo
gender,
esos derechos
I
y
have
no
those
debe
rights,
existir nada
and
que a mí me
nothing
limite a acceder a ellos, que a mí
could
me
limit
limite a
my
sentirme
access
seguro, segura
or
en
to
donde yo
feel
esté,
safe
¿verdad?
wherever
Entonces, realmente
I am.
de lo que les estaba escuchando, realmente yo
As
creo que
I
una
heard
de
you,
las
one
cosas
of
que
the
debemos resaltar
important
es que las
things
personas jóvenes
is the
vivimos tristemente con el
young
problema de ser
persons
discriminados en muchas áreas,
are
¿verdad?
sadly
Soy
discriminated in
mujer,
many
por ejemplo,
areas.
soy joven, si soy
Women,
persona indígena, pues soy
young,
persona indígena,
indigenous.
si
If
¿verdad? Si me catalogan en algún
they
tema de la población
classify
sexualmente
me
diversa, entonces no
in
es solo que soy joven,
any
es que tengo un
diverse
montón de
sexual
etiquetas más
orientation,
que
I
la
have a
misma
lot of
sociedad
more
me impone,
tags that
¿verdad? Y nosotros
they're
en realidad
placed
como
in
población
me
joven lo
by
que queremos
society.
es
As
eso,
younger
que nos visualicen
population, we
como un
want that
joven,
to be
una joven
visualized
empoderada, que
and
quiere
empower
luchar por su país, que
young
quiere
person
luchar
that
por su
want to
comunidad,
fight
¿verdad?
for
Que quiere,
its
lo único
community,
que quiere
country,
es que se le escuche
and just
y
want
que
to be
no se
heard
vea como
and
ese
not to
espacio
be
o
seen
en estos espacios que no
in
se nos
those
vea como
spaces,
las
not to be
personas que no
seen of
tienen
the
esa
persons that
experiencia,
don't have
¿verdad? Que no
experience,
tenés 5
that
10
don't
años
have 5 or
la
10 experience
política
in
o que no estás
politics
en
or
movimientos.
that
No, tal
you're
vez
not
tengo
part
2
of
años de haber
movements.
empezado, pero
Maybe
tengo esas
2
ganas
years ago
porque he
you
vivido la
began, but you
discriminación,
have
porque
this
he vivido
desire
que se me hayan
because you
negado
have
ciertos
you
derechos
have
y
lived
espacios como
discrimination,
estos, yo creo que
and
nos
so many
permiten
spaces have
que
denied
aquí,
your
que habemos
participation.
5 jóvenes, no nos
So being
representemos solo
here,
nosotros.
we are 5
Representemos a cientos, miles y millones de
young
jóvenes
persons that
que
represent
tal vez están en
thousands
sus
of
casas,
youngsters.
¿verdad?
Maybe
Que
they
están
are
en
at
la
home
universidad, que
or
están
in
en un
college
colegio
or
y que dicen, a mí me
in
gustaría
school,
poder
and maybe they're
expresarme,
thinking,
pero
I
no me
would like
siento
to
seguro, no
express
me siento
myself, but
seguro
I
de
don't
poder hacerlo.
feel
Entonces, quisiera,
safe.
para seguir conversando con ustedes, que era por
So,
parte de lo que hablamos ahora
to
en el café,
continue
¿verdad?
with
De
the
hacer esto
dialogue
un poco
as
más de
we were
conversación es,
discussing over the cup of
ustedes
coffee,
como personas
you
jóvenes han
as young
sido
persons
privilegiadas
have
entre
been
lo que se puede decir de
privileged
estar en espacios
of
como
being in
estos,
spaces
¿verdad? De
such as
alcanzar
this,
de una
to
u
be
otra forma
able
esa
somehow
trayectoria y de
to
sentarse acá y
being able
hablar
to
por
sit
sus
here
países, por sus
and
organizaciones.
discuss
Pero yo
on
quisiera
behalf of your
que
countries. But I
por
would like
medio de redes sociales
that
y también las
through
personas que
social
estamos acá,
networks and those
empoderemos
of
a
us
estas
who are
personas
here
jóvenes
to
que les
empower
decía ahorita, que
those
están
young
en su
persons
casa,
that
que
are
están en su cuarto,
there
que
in
pueden
their
estar
home,
viendo eso
in
y
their
no
room,
tienen ese miedo,
and they have
¿verdad?
this
Que decías
desire.
ahora,
And
que cómo yo hago para
I'm thinking
transmitirle a esa
how
persona y decirle, no más miedo.
to
Tenemos los espacios.
how not to
Aperturas
have
como
fear,
estas, como la segunda cumbre,
that
nos
you have
permite
spaces
entender
like the
que sí
first
tenemos
summit,
los
like this
espacios, pero era lo
summit,
que decía
that
la
there
señora
are
Abby,
spaces
tenemos que
available
ir detrás
like
de ellos.
what
No
Abby was
podemos
saying.
quedarnos
We
simplemente
have
decir, yo
to
quiero eso.
look for
Es que
them.
si yo
It's not
realmente
just a
anhelo
desire.
cumplir mis derechos, tengo que estar seguro y
I
estar
have to
segura
be
de que
sure,
voy a encontrar un espacio.
but
Tal
be
vez no va a
sure
ser
to
fácil,
find a
exacto, el
space. It
recorrido no
would
va a
be
ser fácil, pero
easy,
lo
the
vamos a
path would not
lograr.
be easy, but
Entonces,
we
¿qué le
will be
dicen
able
ustedes
to do
a
it.
esos jóvenes?
So what
¿Qué
can
le
you
dices
tell
vos,
those
Rosita, a
young
esas personas
persons,
indígenas? A mí
those
el tema de indígenas me apasiona muchísimo,
indigenous
realmente te
persons
entiendo,
is my
porque he
passion,
luchado aquí en Costa Rica
because I have
con
a
los pueblos
struggle here in
indígenas de
Costa
acá,
Rica with
en que
indigenous
realmente
populations
ustedes
of
son
Costa Rica,
personas,
because
esos
you are
son personas
persons,
junto a
you are
nosotros, no hay
persons together with
distinción.
us,
Pero
no
¿qué le
difference.
decimos a esos
But what
jóvenes
do we
que tal
tell
vez ahorita
these young
tienen miedo, que no
persons
saben
that
qué
are
hacer, cómo
fearful,
salir a
that they
luchar?
don't know what to
¿Cuál es
do,
ese
how
consejo
to
que ustedes le
struggle?
darían?
What would you tell
Tal
them?
vez, si empezamos, Junova o María José.
You know what, Maria Jose?
¿Podrías repetir la última parte
Could
de
you
la pregunta,
please
por favor?
repeat the
Sí.
last
¿Cuál
part of
sería
the
ese
question?
consejo
What would
que le
you
das a
tell
esas
them?
personas jóvenes, ya sea
What
en
would be
Venezuela,
your
¿verdad? Que es tu
advice
país,
in
o a
Venezuela,
nivel
that
de
it is your
América Latina y
country
el
or at
mundo,
Latin
de
American level,
quitarse un poco
to-
de lo que cabe ese miedo para
to
salir a luchar?
get rid of that fear in
El
order
tema del
to
miedo,
fight
algo que es muy un
fear
tema recurrente en Venezuela, ¿no?
is
Que realmente la
very common in
juventud,
Venezuela.
incluso comparto lo que decías
The
sobre
youth
el miedo, que es te cercena, te limita.
limit
Entonces,
you.
Cuando nosotros en Venezuela hablamos de miedo,
When we talk in
este
Venezuela
es un
about
tema muy
fear,
importante. Y
we are
algo
talking
que le da
about
mucho
a very
miedo
important
los líderes
topic.
jóvenes venezolanos,
Young
en mi
Venezuelan
caso,
leaders.
es poder transitar un largo camino
It's
para
to
poder
walk
construir esos pequeños espacios de democracia que nosotros estamos buscando.
the
Entonces,
walk,
cuando
the path
escuché
of
la intervención de Abby,
those
me conecté
spaces
mucho
of democracy.
porque
When
yo
Abby
vengo de
was
un pequeño pueblito en
talking, I
en
come
Venezuela
from a
que se
very
llama Valle de
small
la Pascua.
town
Es un
in Venezuela,
pueblito
Valle de la
pequeño
Pascua,
donde
small
realmente muy pocos líderes han salido
town.
de ahí,
Very few
porque se
leaders
dedica
have
a la
come out of
agricultura
that.
y se dedica
They
básicamente
are farmers.
a lo rural en Venezuela,
It's
¿no?
a rural area.
Cuando yo salgo de Valle de la
When
Pascua tenía
I
mucho miedo porque tenía ese miedo
left
a qué me estoy
my
enfrentando,
town,
a dónde
I
voy,
was
voy a
fearful.
la universidad,
What
¿qué
am
voy a
I
hacer?
facing? What
Y
will
voy
I
a la
do in
universidad
college?
y en la universidad
Went
me
to
enfrento
college
y me
and I
relaciono
face and relate
con,
to
con el miedo mismo. Porque
with
cuando estoy en
fear
la universidad
itself.
es donde las protestas en Venezuela
It's
comienzan
where
a surgir. Yo
the
comencé la universidad en el
protests
2014,
began in
en el
2014,
2014 comienza
2014.
la primera oleada
We
de
had
protestas
the
juveniles
first
en
wave of
¿no?
youth
Y participo y
struggle
me da
and
mucho miedo
protests, and I
realmente
was very
participar,
fearful
porque
to
obviamente en ese momento
of
los
participating
policías
because at that
disparaban a
time
las
police
cabezas
used to
directamente de
shoot
los manifestantes.
directly
Y
to the
en
head
mi
of
estado murió un amigo que se llama César Pereira, que era
one of
como
my
hablar
friends, Cesar
contigo
Pereira,
uno a uno. Entonces, claro,
very
lógicamente
close
esto
friend,
es un temor
and got killed. So this is a
que se hace
systematic
para que
fear.
jóvenes que tienen
So
capacidades de liderazgo no participen.
youth, those who have
Entonces,
leadership, do not
uno es
participate.
arriesgado.
So you risk yourself.
arriesgamos y decimos, vamos a ir,
let's
vamos a ir
go
incluso a la manifestación,
even
no
to
importa qué nos pase, nos
this
cuidamos y tomamos
protest.
ciertas
Doesn't
medidas,
matter,
pero
let's
aún
take
así
certain
vamos y
measures, but let's
participamos.
go, let's participate.
En ese proceso de
In that
ir, de
process
participar, de
of
conectarnos con la
participating,
gente,
of
de
connecting
acceder
with the
a espacios
people,
como foros,
accessing
de
the
crear un proyecto, de
forums to create a
formarte,
project,
comienzas a ver
to
que
educate
la vida
yourself,
de la
you start to
participación
see
juvenil
that
no
young
solamente es un
participation
tema de
is not
estuve
just
en un momento
of
y volví y ya, sino
was
que
in a very
son la
important moment.
suma y el cúmulo
Is
de
the addition
experiencias
of
que vamos sumando en
experiences
la vida
that
diaria.
you start
Y
adding daily.
hoy, precisamente,
Today,
hablaba
I was
con
talking
mis,
to
o sea, con las personas en las redes
with the
sociales
persons in
y
social
les
networks,
contaba
and I
tengo
told them,
cierta conexión
because I have a
empática
certain certain
mis
empathy
amigos allá en
with
Venezuela.
my
Y
friends
les
in
contaba
Venezuela,
que me sentía
and
muy,
I told
muy
them I
emocionada de
felt
estar aquí, en este panel, en este momento.
very
Y
emotional
les decía que
as
no
part of
tengan
this
miedo de
panel, and I
soñar y
was
de
telling me
seguir
not to fear,
buscando
to
por
dream
construir liderazgo y construir
about building
referentes
leadership,
democráticos.
about
Porque la democracia,
references
nosotros
of
hablamos de democracia y
democracy.
es algo como muy
Democracy
grande,
is like
abierto,
something very
abstracto.
huge,
Pero cuando
very
nos damos cuenta que
abstract.
son
But
pequeñas
when
acciones
we
que construyen
realize there are
liderazgos y
little
personas que se van
actions that
conectando,
build up
ahí es donde decimos, ok, estamos construyendo
leadership, we're
algo
building
grande, estamos
something
construyendo
bigger,
tejidos
we're
y vamos
building
hacia allá. Y parte de lo que estamos haciendo en Venezuela, en este momento, la juventud, y
something
estoy muy
in
agradecida,
Venezuela,
por estar acá,
and I'm
conectando
very
con
thankful
nosotros
to
estamos
have been
haciendo,
here,
es que nos
telling you
estamos
about what we're
conectando,
doing, is
liderazgos, que
we are
estamos pensando en que
connecting.
la democracia sí es posible,
Democracy is
en un
possible
contexto sumamente restrictivo,
in a very
en un
restricted
contexto que está
context, in a
sufriendo
context
las peores
that is
indicadores de
suffering the
fragmentación
worst
política, de polarización, en donde la
indicators
gente
of fragmentation, of
prácticamente
polarization,
no se comunica con
and
la
people
otra
do not
por
communicate
miedo a lo que diga
with
el
each
otro.
other because they
Partidos
fear
políticos que creen en la
the
democracia
opinion of the
no se
other.
conectan el uno con el
Political
otro por
parties
miedo a lo que digan sus
fear
referentes y líderes políticos. Eso
their
pasa en Venezuela.
political leaders. That it's
Mucha
the
gente dirá que en este momento
state of affairs in Venezuela.
no están pasando grandes conflictos en mi país.
We
Pero
think
lo
there are
que
not
pasa
big
es que
conflicts
hay
in my country,
incapacidad
but
de la gente poderse
the people
relacionar y
do not
conectar
relate
por
to each
el
other, do not
miedo
connect
a lo que
with each
digan.
other because they
Entonces
fear.
creo que en este momento, y si hay personas que están escuchando que
If
tienen
we
algún
have
tipo de
somebody
temor
listening
por
who are
participar,
fearful
por
in
construir
participate
liderazgo,
of building
yo
a
les diría
leadership,
que,
I will tell them
vale la pena
it's
siempre
worthy.
darlo todo
Give
por nuestros
everything
países.
for our countries and for
Vale la pena.
democracy. It's worth it.
Cuando el día de mañana
Because
veamos
tomorrow,
resultados
when we
y veamos
see,
democracia en
reap the
Venezuela,
fruits, we
Nicaragua,
see
veamos
democracy in
democracia
Venezuela, in
real en
Nicaragua, real
Latinoamérica,
democracy in Latin
vamos a
America,
decir que todo
we will
nuestro esfuerzo,
say
lo que nos dio
all our
miedo de
effort,
salir a la calle,
everything we
tuvo sus
fear,
resultados. Yo
had
estoy
its
completamente convencida de
results.
eso y
I'm
por eso
totally
estoy aquí.
convinced that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Gracias. Yo voy a empezar por
I'll
hacer
start
una
with
pregunta
a
que
question. What will I
Costa
tell
hizo
Ayunova
cuando
Costa
involucró
4 years ago when
en la
she
juventud
joined
en
a
2018?
different movement, different
Prácticamente era una niña
protests in
con mucho
2008?
miedo,
It was a
muchos
girl with a lot of
sueños.
fears,
Muchos de los jóvenes
dreams
nicaragüenses igual
that many
sentían
of
en su
the young
momento.
people in Nicaragua
Y creo que
felt
muchos
at that time.
sentimos que nos
And we
frustramos
feel
nuestras
that our
nuestras
dreams
metas.
were
La dictadura
frustrated, our
Ortega Murillo
goals.
nos frustró los sueños,
Ortega Mureña
pero
dictatorship
eso nos dio mucha
did it,
más fuerza,
but this
mucho más
provided more
ímpetu para
strength
seguir luchando por la
in
libertad.
order to fight for the Nicaragua we want, a just Nicaragua, a free and democratic Nicaragua. As Maria Jose mentioned,
Esto va a ser
this will be the result
de todo lo que hemos
of
perdido
everything we have lost.
perdido nuestra familia,
In Nicaragua, we lost our family, our
nuestra
education,
nacionalidad.
and even their nationality.
Lo
But Nicaraguans, what it is to be a Nicaraguan is with you in your heart.
que hemos tenido como
And
jóvenes organizados,
after
como
all
jóvenes,
of this, where we organize, where we advocate human rights,
el miedo
fear
para el nicaragüense,
for the Nicaraguan
pero
is there.
sabemos de que
But
va a valer la
we
pena
are
cada
aware
minuto
that it's
y
worth
a mí
every
una vez me
minute.
preguntaron,
And I was asked one
Yunova,
time,
si
Yunova,
te ponen a elegir
if
de
you had
nuevo
to
a
choose
involucrarte en
again
las protestas
to
del
get involved in the
2018 y
protests of 2008 and to go through everything you have been through, would you do it again? And I said, I answered, without any doubt. Has been very painful. Ortega Murillo dictatorship took the youth from us, our dreams, our education, but I think each young person that it is outside or inside Nicaragua resisting, because within the university we have a name, is an entity controlled by the Sandinist Liberation Front, is the generations Nicaragua have dealt with these situations to try to find solutions peacefully and in democracy. This is the legacy of the for the coming generations. So we don't have more bloodshed. We have to find alternatives, not for this not to happen again.
Bueno, el miedo
Fear
es algo muy curioso, la verdad. El
is
miedo
very
yo lo
peculiar.
perdí
I
hace 8
lost it
cuando aún estaba
8
empezando
years
mi
ago
primera
when I won
lucha en el colegio,
getting
cuando
started in high
quería que
school,
mi
when I
pueblo
wanted
indígena
that
tuviera una
my
educación
indigenous
de
people
calidad.
would have
Y
an
en ese
education of
entonces, una
quality. At
vez
that
mi
time,
madre me
one time
preguntó si
my
tenía
mother
miedo a
asked me if
enfrentar la
I
realidad. Y yo me
was
pregunté a mí
fear
misma si
facing
era el camino
reality,
correcto.
and I asked
Mi madre
myself
es
if it was
una
the
luchadora social y así
good
como
thing
mi
to
madre
do.
política
My
del Club del
mother is a
quien
social
también está en este país
fighter,
por la persecución política.
and
Mi madre una vez me
my
dijo,
mother told me,
nunca le tengas miedo a no
don't
hacer nada. Tenle
be
miedo a no
fear of
lograr
not
nada por
doing
tu país
anything,
cuando esté en tus manos.
but fear
Es entonces
not
cuando
to
yo
do
empecé y creo
anything
que
for
la
your
sangre
country. And
indígena,
I
la
think my
sangre
indigenous blood,
campesina, la
my
sangre
peasant
andina, las tenemos
blood,
bien
my Indian
marcadas.
blood
Nosotras y
is
nosotros como
very
peruanos,
strong.
hoy
And
sabemos que en el
today we
Perú
know
los
that in
jóvenes estamos
Peru,
marcando una gran
the
historia
young are
porque
making
estamos
history because we are
empezando a
beginning
trenzar esa alianza entre
to
jóvenes y sabemos
put
que a cada
together
marcha que vamos a
to
luchar
solidify the
en nuestra
alliances,
libertad,
and that will
en
end up
pedir
in our
derecho a
freedom
nuestras
and to
libertades,
ask
a que no sigan
demand of our
negociando nuestras
freedoms
tierras a cambio de
and not
intereses
to
propios a las
negotiate
políticas
our land
tradicionales. Sabemos que no
with
sabemos que
traditional
si
politicians.
salimos hoy y mañana no regresamos a
If
casa,
we
sabemos que el pueblo nos va a
go
recordar.
out
Como aquellos
and
jóvenes
we'll
que
move,
dieron la vida
we
en
won't,
estos
don't
2
return
meses de
home,
lucha y seguimos en pie de lucha.
our people would
Y es
remember
así
us.
cuando uno
And this
empieza a
is
vencer
when
miedo. Y
you
yo lo que puedo
start
decir
dealing with
a
your
los jóvenes
fears.
indígenas, a los jóvenes
And
campesinos,
I
a jóvenes del Ande, a
told
personas como nosotros, no le
persons
tengamos
like
miedo a
us,
nada.
don't fear
Porque
anything,
si nosotros no
because
hacemos nada,
if we don't do
no
anything,
esperemos que la generación
let's
que
not
venga
expect
tenga que
that the
comer.
coming generation will have
Creo que muchas y
something to
muchos de
eat. I
nosotros
think many of
vamos
us
a tener que dar la
will
vida
have
para
to
que la generación que
give our
venga
life
tenga
for
por lo menos
the
para
coming
estudiar,
generation
para
in
recibir
order
salud,
so they to
así
have
no sea de calidad,
health,
pero por lo menos tener
education,
algo en casa.
but at least to have
Creo que
something
como dijo
in
la
home in
compañera
the
de
table.
Nicaragua,
And as I
de
listen
regresar a mi
each one
país,
of you,
sé
I
cómo
learn
ayudar y fortalecer a los
and
jóvenes.
I
Como
know
bien se
how
sabe, nosotros como
to
jóvenes somos una semillita que vamos
teach and to
floreciendo,
guide
floreciendo, pero
the
no somos eternos.
young
Y también tenemos que
generation.
volver a plantar otras
We
semillas.
are like
Porque,
flowers. We need to
porque el día
plant
que
new
dejemos de estar
seeds
nosotros, las semillas
because
tienen que
when
continuar,
we
¿no? Como decimos, seremos
are not
siempre la
present,
flor.
others will
En un
come.
atardecer y un otoño brillará. Eso creo que es lo que todos podemos.
We will have a new
Alejandro.
flower.
Now, with the topic of encouraging the Salvadorian youth, now that you're relating, talking this about fear, one has to, as a youth, as a young person, that at the end will be the future leaders. That from their leaderships are the ones that have to, that are already, those that are already there have to be the leaders and channel so the other people, the other youth empower themselves, because at the end, contrary of fear on those issues of the civic spaces is empowerment, is having the courage or the intention of doing something for the country. So I think that there's something important there of the topic of how these young leaderships are going to encourage other people that are not very immersed or interested in changing the reality, like in the case of Salvador, that we know that we are in a very delicate condition because a process is coming where democracy is on the brink of collapse, where their intentions for a re-election that constitutionally is not allowed or permitted, so that you have to be warned or alerted as youth. That has to be the main encouraging point, to see where are we right now, to see what is coming for our country and try to do something to change that, because we are observing that at the end, these authoritarian vice covered up as a democracy will pass the bill in a few years. And as youth, we have to, as political youth leadership, we have to be encouraged in order to act, to give everything for our country and try to change or revert the situation in face of what is coming in the coming years. So I would say that another very important component to encourage, to empower the organized youths of El Salvador are the networks, the support networks, in the sense that how are we going to try to change the reality as individuals? It cannot be as simple to change something so complex. So what has to be achieved is to bring efforts together with other organizations, see the focuses or scopes, the reality in El Salvador. There's some organizations of originary people, there are organizations and feminist organizations, environmental organizations that have very marked positions about the future of the country. So what better way than to getting concerned or encouraging ourselves to change the reality if it is not known from the standpoint of these other organizations. So I think that that would be this about encouraging. Okay, thank you. Great.
Por esos mensajes, yo creo que
For those
aquí lo que nos
messages. I
llevamos
think
es
that what we're
que los
taking
jóvenes no
home
estamos
is that
solos,
we youth are
no
not
estamos solas
by
tampoco,
ourselves.
somos muchos,
We
vamos,
are
tal vez
many of us,
podemos
although
decir que un poquito
I could say that
separados,
we're a little
¿verdad?
bit
Nicaragua,
isolated. Nicaragua,
Venezuela,
Venezuela, Costa Rica, Peru, El Salvador.
pero esos no son todos los países
But those are
donde
not all the
sabemos y
countries where
estamos
we
seguros y
know
seguras
and
que
we're
hay
sure
jóvenes que
that
están
there are
luchando
youth
por
that
sus
are fighting
derechos.
for their rights.
Entonces, a mí de lo que ustedes
So
decían, yo
what you
remarco
said, I
dos,
highlight two
ideas centrales, y la primera es que
core
todos
ideas.
vemos
And the
hacia el
first one is to
futuro,
go
que no nos
looking
vemos
towards the
siempre
future, and
aquí,
we do not always
¿verdad?
see
Sabemos que
ourselves here.
detrás de nosotros
We know
tiene
that
que haber
behind us
otras
there have to be
personas,
other people,
hombres, mujeres, jóvenes, que van
men,
a luchar
young men and women
juntos por
who are going to fight
cumplimiento de estos
like
los
us
derechos
to
humanos
fulfill our
y así
human
de los
rights
derechos de las personas
and the
jóvenes.
rights of the young people.
Y es eso, yo
And
creo
that
que
is,
por medio de las
I
redes
think that
sociales,
through the
¿verdad? Que
social
ahora es
networks that right
un
now
tema de mucha ayuda
is
para
an
eso,
issue
de
of great
poder
help for that,
conectarnos por
to
medio de
protect
las redes, pero
ourselves
también de las
through the
redes de
networks
apoyo.
and through the support
Si
networks.
hay personas jóvenes que
If there are young
quieren
people that
realmente
want really
empoderarse,
to
que
empower
quieren ir a
themselves,
luchar
that
por
want
sus
to go and
derechos, no
fight for their
están
rights,
solos.
they are
En sus
not by
países hay
themselves. In their
organizaciones,
countries, they have
existen
organizations,
organizaciones a
there
las
are
que pueden
groups
acercar,
where they
¿verdad?
can
Pedir
come
ayuda,
approach,
pedir
to come
información y
near to and
empezar
ask
este
for
camino.
help
Yo
and
creo que
information and begin this
concordamos todos en eso, ¿verdad?
roadway.
En que
I think we all agree on this respect that there's already certain spaces that they have been around for maybe 20, 30 years. I can say I've been 1 month, 2 months, or 6 months that I'm beginning in this. Doesn't matter. Those people that have been 20 years, at some moment they had only 1 month, and at that moment they had that illusion of saying, I want to be a part of a different thing, a change. I want to thank you actually for this space. I feel very honored, very happy. I learned a lot. And not only in Latin America do we have these issues, we have other regions where, or similar scenario, or even we have all the countries where we can learn from. So I want to thank you for being here. And Rosita, go ahead. If you allow me, I just want to read a document that we drafted with the young indigenous before coming here. I thank the institutions inviting me to be making me able to be here. When they heard of the invitation, I got together with the 24 departments that we have in our country, and we drafted a document precisely so I could read it here. So one way or the other, so our voices will reach the countries that maybe do not know what we're going through in Peru. And it says like this: I'm Julio Orean, Secretary of the Youth of the National Federation of Peasant, Indigenous, Native People, Original People of Peru. I come here bringing the voices of all the youth of the indigenous people of Peru. We want to, and we accuse before the international community, the serious violation of human rights that are being committed in Peru since December 7th of 2022, after the arbitrary detention of former President Pedro Castillo, the de facto government of Dina Boluarte, that with the purpose of being legitimate, it sets the emergency status in certain regions and carrying out bloody repression against my indigenous brethren and sisters, ordinary people and peasants. Over 67 people have been killed with war weapons and arbitrary detention of youth. Today, a civic military dictatorship is being set up where judiciary, legislative, and executive power are repressing pacific movements and peasant and indigenous movements and organizations of women, accusing us of terrorists and of criminals. The peoples of the rural areas and city ask for justice, a constitution, a worthy life, respect of our territories. We request to this council and to the institutions that could hear us and their mechanisms, and we exhort the Peruvian government so they can comply their constitutional obligations and international obligations on human rights and our Mother Earth. Free immediately those detained, illegally and arbitrarily detained, most of them are youth, and stop the repressive and discriminatory and racist actions. Due to the lack of trust and reliability in the systems of Peruvian justice, we hope to achieve a mission of investigation of experts, independent experts, to identify and punish those responsible of these violations and achieve justice, repair, and guarantees, and that this does not repeat it. Once again, we have to resist the people of the Peru. Once again, we will return to be the youth, indigenous youth. Today, once again, we have to resist with a lot of strength and with the heart in our hands. I want to end up with this phrase. We, the youth and the indigenous people, continue resisting until we find a morning light that's about to, the morning light is about to rise in spite of the darkness. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rosita. I'm going to take 2 more minutes. I think I know we're going a little bit longer, but with what Rosita just mentioned, it's a very important question that it's important for us, for me, for all of you, and those in social networks with us. To each one of you, as you introduce yourself, you talk about a specific right? In the case of Maria Jose, you talk about the topic of financing. Joanna, freedom of expression, and same with Rosita and Alejandro. In this conversation, the idea is to identify those strategies to counteract this issue of violation on human rights and the issue, everything that has to do with democracy. But I want us to leave a message, which is your position as youth leaders as to that right. What is that strategy that as a country, as an organization, as leaders, etc., we can develop to go beyond, to move at least 1 or 2 more steps towards fulfilling that right in each of your countries? So we can begin in order. Giovanna, in your case, freedom of expression.
Perdón.
Thank you, Junova. I'm sorry, Junova.
Para nosotros ha sido
For us,
titánico el tema
it has been titanic, this issue of strategies for freedom of expression. And as youth, we have been, as we were mentioned, we have always been innovating. Because in spite of having a dictatorship, we also had at the moment a pandemic. And we had to reinvent ourselves at strategic level, at how the freedom of expression, we were going to counteract these laws that the Ortega Murillo dictatorship has been putting over our country, which is the issue of cyber crimes, for instance, which is a law that we call the gaffing law, and it's against freedom of expression. As a consequence, 11 people were sentenced to 3 years in prison for out of this law. Nevertheless, as youth, we have seen we have to look for the strategy. One of it is to extend these networks with the youth, like the Latin American Network of Youth for Democracy and other organizations of youth at Latin America level that are not only in Latin America, but also at the European continent. At Asia, we have many youth representatives here that come to see what is happening at Latin America level, and especially these three dictatorships, which are Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, that many of the countries are replicating or imitating these same dynamics. That not totally, but when we see like El Salvador, that is doing the enacting the cyber crime or foreign agent act, then alert is turning on that their democracy is falling. So as youth, that's key. To have these networks with other youth organizations, always been in this type of spaces for to continue raising the voices. Because now we cannot say what is happening because they could be taken to prison, or they could be. Even last week there was an illegal detention. He was kicked out of the country, and today that person is in the United States in a completely illegal process by the Ortega Murillo dictatorship. But here we're going to be. I think that when they're youth with the will of fighting for the democracy of a country, I think that the strategies will never finish, and they will always be innovating themselves, and we will continue adapting ourselves to what is happening in the current context, not only in our country, but at Latin American level.
Así es. Gracias.
Yes.
María José,
Thank you.
en tu
Maria
caso,
Jose, in your
libertad de
case,
asociación y financiamiento.
freedom of association and financing.
En
Yes,
Venezuela,
in
cuando
Venezuela,
hablamos de
when we talk about strategies,
nosotros tenemos que
we
plantear
have
dos
to
escenarios. Uno,
set
el
up a different
escenario
scenario.
de la nación a
One,
futuro,
the future
como jóvenes
vision
líderes nos tenemos que
that as youth and
plantear
leaders
para
we
la
have to propose in order for the
reconstrucción de
reconstruction
tejido
of that social
democrático que nosotros necesitamos
network,
en Venezuela.
democratic network that we need in
Y
Venezuela.
sucede que, bueno,
And it happens that
actualmente
currently
tenemos
we
un
have
régimen autoritario
an
restrictivo.
authoritarian
Entonces,
restrictive regime.
¿cómo pasar
So
de un
how to
régimen
move
autoritario
from an
restrictivo
authoritarian
a un
restrictive
sistema
regime
democrático?
to a democratic system?
Las estrategias que
So
nosotros
the
como
strategies
jóvenes
that
estamos
we as youth
aplicando,
are
utilizando
applying
para
and
eso,
using for
es
that is
principalmente
mainly
conectándonos
connecting
entre nosotros
among
y
ourselves
construyendo
and
nuevos
building
referentes de
new
liderazgo. Porque sí,
leadership reference.
no es secreto para nadie
It's no
lo que-
secret
las
to anyone
situaciones que han ocurrido
the
en
situations that
Venezuela
have happened in
durante los
Venezuela
últimos años
during the
con
latter years
respecto
respect
a
to
la crisis de la
the
oposición en
crisis
Venezuela.
of opposition
Y
in
la
Venezuela.
oposición es el
Opposition is
espectro democrático
the
que
democratic
hace
spectrum
frente
that
a
faces
este régimen
this
autoritario.
authoritarian
Cuando
regime.
nosotros
So when we
planificamos
plan
estrategias para hacer
strategies
frente a
to
ello,
face
nos
that,
encontramos con las
we
limitaciones
find the
que comenté en la primera
limitations I
intervención,
commented in my
porque
first
nosotros
intervention
muy
that we
difícilmente
with
podemos
very
tener acceso
difficulty
a
can
tener
we have access
organizaciones de sociedad civil,
to have organizations and
podemos tener
social
acceso incluso
and
a
civil
la
society,
creación de
and even
partidos
creating
políticos
political parties
propios de la juventud,
of the
y
youth,
que estas organizaciones
and that
puedan
these
recibir
organizations can receive
financiamiento.
financing.
Nosotros aplicamos
We
estrategias de alianza
apply strategies of partnership with
que tienen más
larger
tiempo y tienen
organizations that
otro
have longer
background.
time and have different background.
Es muy importante
It is very
destacar
important
este
to
punto
highlight this
porque
point because
básicamente lo que los
basically
jóvenes venezolanos
what
están
the
haciendo
Venezuelan youth are
actualmente
currently doing
es
is
construyendo estos
building
nuevos referentes de liderazgo
these
para
new
suplir
leadership references
los
to
vacíos
supply
de
the vacuums
desintegración
of
o
disintegration,
descomposición
of
de los
decomposition
referentes de liderazgo
of
que
the
habían antes en la
re-
oposición venezolana.
reference leaderships that we had before in
Estamos en
the
un proceso de
Venezuelan opposition. So
construcción de
we're in a
nuevos referentes. Para ello,
process of construction of new
nosotros
references, and for
necesitamos,
that we
pues,
need
conectarnos con
to
proyectos,
connect
con
ourselves with
iniciativas
projects,
que, pues,
initiatives
que apoyen
that
a
support
la realización de las actividades que los
the
jóvenes
activities
venezolanos
that the
se
Venezuelan
encuentran
youth
ejecutando.
are
Y eso es algo que
executing.
es básico en
That
lo
is
que es la
basic
construcción
in
del
what is the building
empoderamiento
of the
del
empowerment
joven dentro del
of
espacio
a
cívico.
young person within the
Cuando
civic
nosotros
space.
vemos esta estrategia que
When we
estamos
see this
aplicando en
strategy
este
that we're
momento,
applying at
y
this
nos
moment,
visionamos
and
hacia el
we
futuro, a
see
lo que viene,
towards the
nos
future of
visionamos
what is
en
happening,
etapas.
we see it
¿Cuáles
in
son las
phases.
etapas?
And which
Primero
are the
hay que ser
stages of phases?
realistas.
First, we have to be
Y la
realistic.
realidad es
And
que
the reality is that we
actualmente
currently
no estamos en
are
un espacio,
not-
o sea, nosotros no somos los que estamos
we are
tomando
not
las decisiones,
the ones
sino
making
que
the
estamos
decisions, but we
construyendo
are
liderazgo
building
para
leadership
tomar
to
decisiones.
make
Y
decisions.
realmente eso es lo que
And
estamos
actually,
haciendo.
we're doing
Estamos
that.
construyendo
We're
fuerzas para
building
llegar
strength
a ese nivel.
to reach that
Esto
level.
lo hemos comenzado
We
a
have
hacer.
started doing
En el
this.
primer paso fueron las
And the first
elecciones
step,
a
these were the
gobernadores
elections
y
for
alcaldes
governors
que
and
sucedieron
mayors
en
that
2021.
occurred in
En
2021.
las elecciones a
In
gobernadores
the
y
election for
alcaldes
governors
y
and mayors
legislativas y
and
municipales,
legislative,
regionales y
municipal,
municipales,
regional and municipal
jóvenes se postularon
election,
a
youth
diputados y a concejales
run
de sus
for
municipios.
members
Estos
of
jóvenes
parliament
venían de
and
ser
members of council members of their
dirigentes
counties.
sociales
They were
y
simply
pasaron en la
social
elección a ser
directors, and they moved
ya
into the election
referentes
to
de
be
liderazgo.
reference of
Como vemos
leadership.
casos como
And we
jóvenes
see cases as
en el
youth
estado Zulia en Venezuela,
in
que
the
una
southern
joven
state of
de ser
Venezuela, a
dirigente
youth
estudiantil,
after being
hoy
a
en
student
día
leader,
es la
currently
vicepresidenta
is
del
the vice
Consejo
president of the
Legislativo
Legislative
del estado
Council
Zulia en
of the
Venezuela.
Zulia state in
Los
Venezuela.
liderazgos van
So
escalando.
the leaderships are scaling up
En este
positions.
proceso
So
de
in this
escalar
process of
posiciones,
scaling up
nosotros
positions,
nos fijamos una
we
nueva meta.
set up a
Y
new
esa
goal,
nueva
and that
meta
new goal
es
is
participar en
to
la
participate
construcción de la
in the
estrategia
building
para las
of the
elecciones
strategy for
primarias,
the
que
primary
será
elections
este
that will
próximo
be
22 de
this
octubre en
October
Venezuela.
22,
Nosotros
coming
como
October 22 in
jóvenes
Venezuela.
estamos
We as
participando
youth
en la
are
construcción
participating in the
de
building
la
of
elección primaria,
the
porque
primary
nosotros
election
tenemos
because
que
we have
continuar
to continue
elevando los perfiles
raising up the
para que
profiles
los jóvenes puedan
so the
pertenecer
youth
a la
can
toma de
belong
decisiones.
to decision making.
Luego de ello,
After that,
la estrategia es poder
the strategy is
participar
to be
en
able
las
to
elecciones
participate in the
presidenciales
presidential
como
elections
entes observadores
as
de la
observer
elección.
entities of the
Y
election,
poder involucrar
and to be
en
able
este
to get
tipo de espacios
involved
a
in this type of
personas que
space,
puedan
people
ser
that could be
observadores, incluso
observers, even
internacionales,
international
como hacer
observers.
invitación.
I make an
El
invitation to you.
tema de
That's
que
the issue
estamos
that
construyendo
we are
nueva
building
fuerza del movimiento
new
democrático
strengths of the
venezolano.
Venezuelan
Y
democratic
como
movement.
estrategia
And
próxima,
as the next strategy,
construyendo esta
building
fuerza,
this strength,
vamos a tener
we're going
nuestros
to
próximos
have our
candidatos
next
a las próximas
candidates
elecciones
and the
a
next
diputados
election
nacionales en
for
el
national
2025.
members of
Eso lo
parliament in
estamos
2025.
construyendo y
That's what
lo
we're
estamos haciendo
building
de
up,
manera objetiva
and we're
y
doing it in an
realista.
objective and
En el Foro
realistic way.
Permanente de Juventud
Permanent Forum
manejamos un
of Friends,
mapeo de más de
we have a
1.500
mapping of over
jóvenes
1,500
líderes
leader
referentes
youth
en Venezuela. Y estos jóvenes
in
líderes
Venezuela,
que nos encontramos haciendo un
and
seguimiento y un monitoreo
those that are doing a
preciso
follow-up and
de
precise
cómo están
monitoring as
desarrollando su
how
liderazgo,
you're
es como
developing their
es la
leadership
herramienta en la que
is the
nosotros
tool in
creemos
which we
que
believe
vamos a poder reconstruir ese tejido social.
that we're going to
Pero claro,
knit
hay
that
que
social
hablar de la operatividad
tissue.
del asunto.
But we have to talk about the
Cuando nosotros hablamos
operationality
de
of
democracia,
the issue,
no
because
lo
when we talk about
podemos
democracy,
decir
we cannot
desde
say it
un punto de
from a
vista
standpoint,
diluido, sino que tenemos
from a
que hablar
diluted
cuál es
standpoint.
el
We have to talk
paso a
which is
paso
the step
que
by
estamos
step
realizando para poder lograr ese objetivo.
to
Y
achieve that
precisamente
objective.
por eso es que muchos de estos jóvenes referentes que
Precisely
están
because of
construyendo
that,
su liderazgo
one of those referent
han tenido que anclarse a
youth
estas
that are
organizaciones
building
más
up their
grandes
leadership, they have to
para
anchor
poder
to
recibir el
larger
financiamiento y el
organizations to
costeo
receive
de sus
financing
actividades.
and the
Entonces,
costing
claro,
of their activities.
automáticamente nosotros
So this
hemos
logically,
creado una gran
we surf
cantidad de
a great
olas, porque muchos
number
de
of
estos jóvenes,
waves
pues,
because
no
many of these
puede,
youth cannot
por parte de Estados Unidos no puede recibir
from the
financiamiento
United States, they
porque
cannot receive financing
estaríamos
because
siendo
we will be
condenados como agentes del
condemned
FBI. O
as
sea, básicamente,
CIA agents. We could be detained for this. And
Pero nosotros tenemos
so
la
we
valentía,
have the
no tenemos
courage,
miedo a
we
decir la verdad,
fear, we do
y
not
lo
fear
tenemos
saying
que
the truth,
hacer
and we
porque
have
es
to
la
do it
única forma,
because
y
it
es
is
la
the
única
only way,
ventaja que
it is the
nosotros
only
tenemos
window we
de
have
poder decir las cosas
of
como
being able to
son,
say the
de
things
poder
as they are,
decir el paso
and
a
to say
paso
the step
que
by
la
step
juventud venezolana está
that the
haciendo para
Venezuelan
poder
youth is doing
recobrar la
in order to
y
recover
yo les
democracy.
garantizo que sí lo vamos a lograr.
And I think we're going to achieve it.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Rosita, en tu caso, libertad
Rosita, in your
de
case,
reunión pacífica.
freedom of Pacific meeting.
Bueno, es un tema que nos
It's
está
an
costando
issue
hasta
that
el
is
momento poder
costing
volver
us
a recuperarlo. Como
to
mencionaba,
recover it again.
la poquita
As I mentioned,
democracia,
the
la
little
poquita
democracy,
libertad
the
que
little
lo
freedom
teníamos,
that we
nos
had,
los arrebataron.
they took it away from us.
Sí, nosotros como jóvenes
We as
estamos
youth
los líderes ya empoderados,
the
estamos
leaders
formando
are
las
empowered
alianzas
and forming up
gremios
partnerships with
estudiantiles,
student
con organizaciones y
unions
federaciones
and
de
organization
bases jóvenes,
federations of
justamente para poder
youth base in order
armar. Ya
to
también
set
nosotros
up,
estamos
because we
pidiendo en
are
nuestro país
asking
una
our
nueva
country
constitución.
for a new constitution
Entonces,
to be drafted. So
estamos trabajando
we are
en
working
eso, estamos
on that.
buscando leyes
We're looking for
con
laws or acts
personas profesionales
with
ya en el
professional
ámbito
people
legal
in the
para
legal
poder
area
armar
to be
leyes
able to set up
donde
laws or acts
garantice el
where they guarantee
50% de
50%
participación de
of
pueblos indígenas
participation
en
of
el
indigenous
poder,
people
en el
in the
parlamento,
power in the
y el otro
parliament,
50%
and the other
pues
50%
sea, podríamos decir, la
maybe
ciudad.
the city.
Entonces es algo que
So
obviamente
that
no
is
es
something that
fácil
obviously
porque no nos han
it is not
permitido
easy,
siempre.
because
Hace 200
they have
años
not
nos
allowed
quitaron
us that.
la-
200 years
la-
ago,
la
they took away
democracia,
from us
se
the
podría
democracy,
decir,
so we could
pero hoy
say.
queremos
But
tratar de
today we want
buscar
to
o
try
esa
to look
alianza
for that partnership,
democráticas,
the
donde
democratic forces,
buscamos una democracia
where we're
real,
looking
¿no?
for the real
Entonces,
democracy.
como
So
jóvenes, pues estamos
as youth,
trabajando en
we're
eso,
trying,
estamos
working on that.
bajando a las comunidades,
We're visiting the
a
communities
empaparnos y a empoderar también a los
get
jóvenes que
acquainted
recién
with
están
them and
empezando en este
empower the
camino,
youth that are just
de
beginning
cómo
this
es una
roadway
lucha, de
of
cómo es
how a fight or
buscar un
struggle is,
objetivo,
how
como
to
dijo la
look for an
compañera de
objective, as the
Venezuela.
colleague
Siempre
of
hay que
Venezuela
ser
said.
francos y
We always
realistas,
have to be
porque uno no
straightforward
se
and
puede
realistic, because
ilusionar y
one
decir de la
cannot
noche
get
a la
excited
mañana
and
quiero
say,
lograr. Eso es
I'll
mentira.
achieve that
Todo
one day
lleva un
from one way to the
tiempo,
other. That's the
todo
lie.
es un
Everything takes a
proceso
time.
de lucha
Everything is
cotidiana
a
día por día
process
para
of
poder
daily
llegar
struggle
al objetivo,
to
y
achieve the
eso no
objective,
termina ahí.
and that
Tienes
does
que
not
seguir
finish there. You have to
continuando, tienes que
continue. You
seguir
have to
luchando
continue
para mantener,
fighting to keep
como decir, el objetivo que has logrado,
the
¿no?
objective
Y
you have
esto,
achieved.
en
And
Perú, las
this
reuniones
in
pacíficas
Peru, the
obviamente
Pacific
ahorita las
meetings,
tenemos
obviously,
prohibidas porque
they're
estamos en un estado de
forbidden because we're in a
emergencia.
under a
Eso
state
que
of
la
emergency.
Constitución nos ampara, que sí podemos
But the
reunirnos
Constitution
para
protects us.
muchas
Say we
cosas,
could
para
meet for
el
different
tema
things.
político, pero sin embargo,
But
pues
however,
tenemos a Perú
we
en
have
las calles
Peru
con
out in the
militares,
streets with
tenemos tarjetas en
militaries.
la calle,
We
y
have
si
tanks
se
in the
entera
streets,
algún policía
and
que
if
tú
a
estás en la
police
casa con
officer
3, 4, pues
finds out that you're in a house with 3 or 4, immediately they have a seize, they enter, and they take you, detain arbitrarily, and in the midst of that, they detain you for 15 months for you to be investigated, in spite of the fact that there are not enough proofs or there's not enough evidence of what you're doing. But that's the injustice we're experiencing. But that is something that does not stop us. I think we have a very rebel blood, as we say in the indigenous people. In spite of the persecution we might suffer, we're not going to stop and looking for the fight that we really want. We want a change. We want a new constitution that works towards the indigenous people, not to externally, but focused on that. We're looking for a quality of education. We want professionals with human warmth, not that when they reach the power, that you receive some money and you turn around. Unfortunately, that's happened before. We have trained the youth that have reached the power, but many things happen in the power and they end up being different people, and that's just regrettable. But today we want to form public policies in a cleaner way, with a reality focused on what the country needs and what the country is actually looking for. Thank you. And Alejandro, in your case, it would be the restricted civic liberties as to youth. Well, in the subject matter or topic of the youth, we have two scopes. We talk about strategies, alternative recovery. It's the topic of leaving aside this focus from organize yourself, or leaving aside this adult center focus, in the sense that many times what you mentioned at the beginning is the position of the youth organization is seen as lesser because they have no experience, they have no experience, they don't have that capacity, or they're asked less because of their age or different issues. So maybe this is a more cultural issue, more leaving aside. Sometimes it's an issue of the ego of the leaderships that have been a long time and these dynamics, and to yield to the new youth leaderships. That at the end is an important element, because if we leave aside this adult centeredness, what we're going to generate is giving space and protagonism to those new faces that I do not doubt will have visions of reality that are changing, that are dynamic, and will even bring innovating proposals on the topic, which is the main issue in the country, the issue of democracy, the state of law that has been vulnerated. Besides that, always following the logic of the freedom of association that is restricted, that the possibility of arbitrary detentions exists, and with the issue with the pandemics, as was mentioned, another alternative has to be positioning through social networks. At the end, this issue, the organization I am, because this allows us to position ourselves in topics that maybe we cannot carry out in the street because of the restrictions. So this way generates this a greater vision, generate greater impact, because that's what the social networks do, to reach more people and have a greater media impact. So an alternative would be to bet on the cyber activism, not substituting with the traditional activism, because it's really important. Traditional activism, street activism has to continue, but use cyber activism as a support tool, as a tool to position topics within the social networks, within the mass media, communication mass media, and following the logic of the adult-centeredness in these spaces, maybe to talk about sharing spaces with these, such as these, they're important under intergenerational logics. That is promoting spaces where not only we have a leadership that have a greater experience, but new leaderships of youth where obviously we take into account, and there will be an exchange of recommendations, proposals, alternatives, which will be profitable to solve the problems, political and social problems that the country experiences. And talking about this, we will also mention another proposal, the topic of continue betting on the networks, support networks, spaces, so the youth organizations can feel empowered, and also this space exchange experiences in the case of El Salvador, taken at regional level, not only in El Salvador, spaces such as the platform of Central American Civic Action that has as one of its goals or purposes to make these experience exchanges in Central America. That is, the youth organizations of Honduras have this problem right now. The situation in Guatemala, national situation in Guatemala, is this one to have these spaces so the organization, youth organizations at regional level can have the possibility of express themselves, exchange, and say, hey, in our countries this is happening, what can we do? And maybe a last issue will be that of training. At the end, the training processes, although I think that it's important to clarify, the training processes are a privilege also. Why? Because a young person from the rural sector that has limited socio-economic conditions maybe is not interested or does not see necessary to talk about democracy, to talk about rule of law, about civic space, because what these people are looking for, because we're in a system where the youth, what they need is to start working, to be labored, produce in order to get their families ahead, to feed their families. So we have to understand that training processes is a privilege also, that the people, those of us that have the possibility of being part of learning, of building ourselves in democracy, rule of law, also take those learnings to other people and raise awareness on those that do not see it necessary. So to bet on the training process is something that's also being done from the platform that I mentioned, and I think that these are the alternatives that from El Salvador we've been carried out. Okay, thank you. Okay, to wrap up.
Como parte de este aplauso que ustedes le
Okay, as
brindaban
part of
a
this
Alejandro,
round you're giving
quiero
to
que para
Alejandro,
cerrar con
I want
ellos
us to
cuatro les
close with
demos
them
un
four. Let's
aplauso
bring a
porque
good
yo creo que
hand,
son
because
personas que sin duda
I think
están
that there are
representando
people
muy
that are
bien a la
representing
juventud
very
de sus
well
países
the
y
youth
también
of
a
their
todos
countries,
esos jóvenes
and also all those
que tal vez
youth
nos están viendo, como les decía
that
ahora,
maybe
por
are
redes
observing us
sociales,
through
¿verdad? Y
social
también que están
networks,
acá, que nos están
and that
acompañando
also
en la
here
audiencia.
accompanying us here
Darles un fuerte
presential.
aplauso
Let's
porque
give
se
a
lo
good
merecen. Luchar
round
por esto no
hand,
es
because they
sencillo.
deserve it. Fighting for this is not easy.
Bueno, agradecerles a ustedes
I want to thank
directamente
you
por
directly
el
for
espacio. Los
the
invito a que
space.
nos
I invite you
acompañen
to
junto a
accompany
la
us
audiencia,
together with
porque
the
parte de lo que
audience,
decía
because
ahora es que
part
no
of what
solo
I
en
was saying
América
right now is
Latina
that not in
tenemos
Latin America
estas
do we have
situaciones,
this
¿verdad?
situations,
En
these
los
issues
diferentes países y
with
regiones que
different
vivimos,
countries and
diversas
regions where
realidades,
we
y yo quiero
experience different
invitar,
realities. I want to
en la
invite
audiencia tenemos
In the audience, we have people represented of the Philippines, Kenya, Bosnia, and Herzegovina to accompany us up here on the stage, on the main table, to tell us their experiences and their context about the region. Thank you.
Bueno, bienvenidos al espacio,
Welcome
¿verdad? Para mí es
to
un
this
gusto que estén acá.
space.
En esta
Very
ocasión,
happy to have you
como
here.
lo que queremos
As I
es
mentioned, we
escucharlos a
want
ustedes,
to
porque
hear
las
from
realidades,
you
tal vez acá en América Latina,
because
son
realities in
diferentes,
Latin America are
¿verdad?
different
Pero también
from
la
your
posición de ustedes
context,
no deja de ser menos importante. Así
but
que
your
este espacio es
position is very
ustedes que nos
important.
cuenten
So,
cuáles son esas vivencias, esas
tell us
realidades
about
en sus países. Así que
your
bienvenidos
realities.
y el espacio es de
Welcome.
ustedes. Quien guste
Space is
empezar.
yours, so whomever wants to begin.
Okay, I can begin. Hi everyone.
Hola
My name is
todos.
Maso. I
Ma-
am from the Philippines, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Bangsamoro Policy Research Institute. It's a volunteer-based, non-profit think tank based and focused on Bangsamoro region in the southern Philippines, which provides scholarship and supports research-based policy lobbying at the Bangsamoro Regional Parliament. I also seat at the Global Membership Advisory Board of Generation Democracy Network, which is a global network of young people which provides platform for young people to connect with each other, share ideas and experiences, and collaborate on projects and initiatives aimed at strengthening civic engagements, democracy, and human rights by and for young people around the globe. So I know that I'm supposed to speak about my experience in the Philippines, and I'm just very honored to be here in front of you all. I've heard amazing stories from the previous panel, and I think more than actually sharing my experience in the Philippines, I'd like to take this opportunity to actually send a message of solidarity, because the context in the Philippines is a little bit different. I know that we have a lot of similarities as well, but I think more importantly, as someone, and I've been learning about the experiences and the context of democracy and civic engagement and youth participation in political processes here in Latin America. And so I'm just very amazed and inspired, and I'm heartened by the efforts of young people in this region, this particular region, to create positive change in their communities. I think that you are the future of your society, and your voices are critical to ensure that democratic values and civic engagement remain vibrant and inclusive. So I understand that you, and as well as us in Asia region, face many challenges in our efforts to keep civic engagement spaces open, whether it is political polarization, marginalization, or limited access to resources. These obstacles can be daunting. However, I urge you to stay committed to your cause and to continue to work tirelessly to ensure that all young people have a voice in shaping their communities by staying engaged and active. You're helping to create a more just and equitable world. You're challenging the status quo and standing up for what you believe in. Your passion and determination are truly inspiring, and I have no doubt that you will make a lasting impact on your society. So let us continue to work together to ensure that civic engagement spaces remain open and accessible to all young people. Let us continue to amplify each other's voices and to support each other in our efforts to promote democratic values and civic engagement. Together we can build a better and brighter future for all.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you. First, I want to say that I feel I'm in a mix of emotions after hearing the testimonies and the stories of the young people from this region. First, I am honored to sit alongside you to spend these days in Costa Rica. I come from a heart-shaped country in Europe. As they say in one movie, it's the country of blood and honey. So you can see both beautiful things and the worst kinds of atrocities. And that's why I'm saddened. I'm deeply saddened that you, as well as us in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and you here in this region, have seen the worst parts of the human spirit. Why I'm telling it in such a way, it's because Even when you look at the Bible, Jesus says that what you do to the smallest of my brethren, you do to me directly. So how can people who can remove young people or make young people suffer be anything else than atrocities and a tarnish on the human race? But speaking of that, after that, even though I'm saddened, I'm proud because I know each of you either was a victim, knew a victim, or lost someone important. Being a victim doesn't necessarily mean dying or being imprisoned. It means being prohibited from a just and fair educational system, just and fair judiciary system, not having any rights or privileges in your basic human needs. But also those victims, I believe personally, when looking at it from a Bosnian perspective, they didn't wish for tributes. They didn't wish for songs of lore and valor. Their wish was simple: liberty, freedom, and justice as a human being. And that's why I'm proud, because when I heard all those stories from Peru, from Argentina, from different kinds of Venezuela, from different kinds of places, I am proud that I see that young people here in the Philippines, in Bosnia, in Kenya, in the African regions, under all personalized and generalized hardships, still contribute to those dreams, both as an honor towards the ones that came before us and as a commitment to the ones that will come after. So to like do this thing when I contribute like myself to the discussion, I've done a lot through NGO work. So I was in the Youth Council at one point. I did a lot through the House of Representatives. But the biggest impact we can have in our lives, and I'm reiterating that from the first panel a couple of days ago, is creating everlasting solutions, but not personalized solutions towards each and every one of us. And I'm going to give you an example from Bosnia and Herzegovina. When the war started, it was much worse than the war in Ukraine that's currently going on. We had an embargo, and everyone in the global community thought that it was best that we don't have access to any weaponry. Everyone except Mr. Joe Biden, who's the current president of the United States. Alongside the group of senators, they can ask for armaments for the defenders of Bosnia and Herzegovina. They asked for security, they asked for peace, they initiated the Dayton Peace Accords. And why? Because it created a permanent solution that now people in Ukraine have the necessary support that is required to defend their homes. And that's what I want to send out as a message here today for young people. What we do here in Costa Rica, what we do in the Netherlands, what we do in the United States must all come together to bring a permanent solution for any problem in the future. So I hope I gave a certain perspective from a Bosnian, a small heart-shaped country in Europe. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Dennis Sankali Olekais. I come from the Republic of Kenya. Kenya is in Africa, for those who don't know. Yes, and I am the Director General for Youth Senate Kenya, a national youth serving organization that works towards mainstreaming youth participation in politics and political processes in Kenya. I'm also part of the IRI Generation Democracy Network, and that is why I'm here today, to share my experience and also to connect with amazing young leaders from across the globe. Maybe to share my experience on what and what the government of Kenya is doing in terms of restricting the civic spaces in Kenya. Subsequent regimes in Kenya have come up with different strategies to muzzle out the voices of civil society organizations, either by arbitrarily arresting civil society actors, using intimidation, sometimes raiding offices for civil society organization, killing protesters and all that, and so on and so forth. We came out of an election last year. We did an election last year in August, and before the elections, during the campaigns, we signed a charter with different political formations, both now that the political formation that is in government and the political formation that is in opposition, together with other three major political parties in terms of mainstreaming youth issues in the next regime. What we agreed with those formations is that once the government is going to be formed, the government is going to allocate 30% of political seats in different cadres of government, from the executive going down to those levels. So when the government got into power, one of the things they did, we have a ruling party that is composed of 2 major tribes in Kenya. The president appointed 8 members from his tribe. The deputy president appointed another 8 members from his tribe. And our cabinet is supposed to be composed by 20 members. So it leaves out 4 for other 40 communities to share. So young people have come out, first of all, to condemn that tribalism in government. We are holding the government accountable in terms of, we are 42 tribes in Kenya. Why are you rewarding only the two major communities in Kenya? Number 2, we had agreed on 30% of opportunities, government positions to be given out to the youth, irrespective of any political formation that is going to go to form government. What happened is the president appointed senior citizens in those positions, no single youth in the cabinet, in the executive. He later on appointed the principal secretaries, no single youth in those positions. Just the other day, before I traveled back here, I traveled to Costa Rica, the president appointed what we call chief administrative secretaries. Those are illegal positions because they are not in our constitution. It was created to suit the political needs of the ruling coalition. With those appointments, the president appointed 50 assistant ministers the positions are not in the constitution. Again, there is no representation among the young people. For those who follow the African news or African politics, 4 countries were demonstrating on the 20th of March: Kenya, Tunisia, South Africa, and Nigeria. The other countries are demonstrating on issues of elections, maybe. For Kenya, we are demonstrating on the high cost of living. We, as young people in Kenya, have decided to join those protests. One, because we had a charter with the government. They did not implement that charter. We had a charter with the government in terms of mainstreaming youth participation in decision-making process. We are not in government. Number 2, the government has gone ahead to come up with laws that is going to take us back in terms of the National Youth Council. National Youth Councils are concepts that are supposed to mainstream youth participation in decision-making processes across the world. By coming up with National Youth Councils, elections are supposed to be done by the National Youth Councils to get the council members. What our government is doing, it is now removing that mandate, the aspect of elections in the National Youth Council, and replacing it with appointive mandate, where the Minister of Youth is given powers to appoint puppets, people who are going to sing the government song. Young people are in the street. Civil society organizations, youth-led civil society organizations drew up a petition and presented it to Parliament. But even before that, while we were presenting the petition to Parliament, the police came. We were young people were brutally maimed. Other civil society leaders were arrested. We are having information from government sources that the government is looking at deregistering the organizations that signed the petitions. So those are some of the threats that we are facing as young people in Kenya. Number 3, in Kenya, the opposition are doing protests on a weekly basis from Monday to Thursday in Kenya. We have decided as young people that we are going to join the protests so that we can hold this government into account. The government is talking about amending the laws of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to remove the aspect of inclusive participation of the citizens of Kenya in terms of appointing the commissioners. The government is looking at having a selected few form an aspect of a task force to select people who are going to manage our next elections. The government is looking at reducing funding for universities where young people will not have access to education. The government has delayed disbursing help loans to students. Young people cannot access education. We have decided to join the opposition in their protest so that we can hold this government into account. With the 3 successful demonstrations, we have had young people being arrested arbitrarily. and spend their times in cells. They have been taken to court. We have had young people being maimed. We have lost about 8 people from Monday last week to the protest that happened on Monday, this Monday. 8 young people have died while trying to hold this government into account. So I want to urge my good friends from this region that you are not alone. Let us continue holding this government into account. Let us continue demanding for change. Let us continue to demand and change the status quo. I was a candidate in the last election, in the 2022 general election. I was running for position of senator of my county, and I experienced firsthand barriers to young youth participation in elections. I was running for position of senator, and in our community, in Kenya, there is a concept coming up, it's called the negotiated democracy, whereby you are being asked by your elders. I was summoned by I come from a pastoralist community. I was summoned by my elders, and I was told, you are too young to run for office. We have got a better candidate. We have got somebody who is experienced. We have got somebody who has got deep pockets. We have got somebody who can finance campaigns, whereas you cannot, you don't have the capacity to run a serious campaign. So we are demanding you to step down in favor of this candidate. So it was my first experience with the barriers to youth participation in politics. I am not giving up. In 2027, they will find me ready and better equipped to run for office. So I want to urge my colleagues from the civil society space, all these changes that we are presenting in documents, all these changes that we are talking about in conferences, we can only implement it while we run for office. Go there, run for office, get into parliament, effect those changes. Legislate, make policies that is going to make this world, that is going to make your country a better place. Thank you so much.
Bueno, agradecerles una vez más por el espacio, por estar aquí. Realmente las palabras y solidarizarse con la región, hablo por todos y por todas, realmente es muy importante para nosotros. Y el mensaje que podemos dejar hoy, no solo a los que estamos acá presentes, sino también en redes sociales, es lo que decían ustedes, no estamos solos ni solas, somos todo un planeta completo luchando por los derechos de las personas jóvenes. No es solo lo que pase en América Latina, no es solo lo que pasa en Europa, no es solo lo que pasa en el continente africano. En cualquier parte del mundo, todos y todas estamos unidos para poder cumplir con los derechos y tener ese acceso, las personas jóvenes, a derechos que simplemente nos competen y que nos corresponden por ser personas. Así que muchas gracias a ustedes por contarnos sus experiencias, por estar acá. A todas las personas que nos acompañan y nos han acompañado en redes sociales, agradecerles a la audiencia de hoy. Si tienen alguna consulta, si tienen alguna recomendación para presentar el día de mañana, por favor acérquense al equipo organizador, a nosotros y a nosotras, para con gusto y con todo el placer del mundo.
With a pleasure tomorrow to bring these recommendations. Thank you. Good night.
Hola. Gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy.
Thank you for being here today. We want to thank the International for this opportunity, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Costa Rica for the opportunity of this event, for us for being here. We invite you in the reception in the Antigua Aduana, a few blocks from here, and you will be guided, and we will gather recommendations and questions, and you can contact us in our web address. Thank you and have a good night.
Por favor, los ponentes, si se pueden acercar acá para una foto, también había estos invitados.
We'll take a picture of those who were involved in the activity this afternoon.